Good morning, sir. I am Lamima Samin, and today I will be presenting on the formation of political space in ancient times through imperial and territorial conquest. We will explore how authority took shape over land and people in early civilization through both monarchies and non-monarchies. Now, we can tell that. Let's begin with a basic question. What is a political space? Political space means the area over which power or authority is exercised. But it's not just about the land, it also includes system of rule, infrastructure like roads and cities, and even ideologies. What people believe gives a ruler the right of the rule. Political space is shaped in many ways through conquest, colonization, diplomacy, and trade. In ancient times, these strategies helps expand to control empires or alliances. Now, let's look at the powerful monarchy, the Achaemenid Empire. Achaemenid Empire. Founded by Cyrus the Great and expanded by Darius. This empire stretched over 5.5 million square kilometers, covering land from the Balkans in Europe and the Indus Valley in Asia. What made the Achaemenids so effective was their system or strategies or province, each ruled by a governor. They also built railroads for fast communication and established magnificent capitals like Persepolis. Even though they conquered vast regions, they maintained control through a smart mix or military power, uh, and even religious and cultural tolerance. This shows how monarchies could create and manage huge political space. Extent of Achaemenid Empire. Here we can see a map that extend the Achaemenid Empire around 500 BCE. This map shows the empire's massive reach from Europe through Egypt and the Middle East and all the way of Persia in India. The way they divided their territory and connected it through roads and administration laid the foundation for early imperial geography. Non-monarchies, ancient Athens. Now, let's switch to a non-monarchies example. As we said before, ancient Athens, unlike monarchies, Athens had directly democracy, no king ruled the city. Citizens voted directly on laws and leadership. To expand this political space, Athens used colonization and alliances like the famous Dialan League. Their influence grew not by military conquest alone, but through trade, naval power, and shared ideology. Even though Athens did not directly control all its colonies, those areas often stayed culturally and politically aligned with the city. In conclusion, two parts to power. So, do we learn from this example? Monarchies like the Achaemenid Empire created political space through centralized control, military expansion, and bureaucracy. Non-monarchies like Athens used decentralized influence, trade, ideology, and alliances. Both systems transform territory into governed space, laying the foundation for how political geography works today. This is all from my side. Thank you for listening. I hope this presentation helped you understand how different systems in ancient times formed political space through conquest and influence. Thank you, sir.
All right. Assalamu alaikum, sir. This is Anika Firdaus. I'll be picking up from where we left off. In this part, I will walk you through how political authority and space were structured in a monarchy and a non monarchy. We will be focusing on two historical examples here, the Achaemenid Empire as a monarchy and the Roman Republic as a non monarchy. Both had very different ways of handling power, but both also show how those decisions shaped entire societies even long after their time. So let's start with the monarchy part. We chose the Achaemenid Empire because it's one of the clearest examples of a centralized monarchy that still managed to rule over a huge and diverse population. It was founded by Cyrus the Great, and this empire was not just about conquest, it was also about how to govern people with different cultures, beliefs, and languages, all while keeping power centralized. And the way they pulled that off, actually really smart. Let me show you how their system worked. So, at the center of this empire was the King of Kings. He had absolute all the power, and that power often came with religious or divine backing. But what's interesting is that the king did not try to control everything by himself. He divided the empire into provinces called satrapies. Um, each of these had a governor called satrap. The satrap was basically someone who managed taxes, local justice, and even the army in that area. So basically, the king stayed at the top, but day to day decisions were made locally. But giving that much control to local governors could be risky, right? So, how did the Persians make sure things did not spiral out of control? Let's check that out. So, they had a built in system of checks and balances. Um, like every satrap had to work with military leaders and treasurers who weren't under his direct control. But on top of that, the king had a network of secret inspectors. They were also known as the eyes and ears of the king. These people traveled around and sent reports straight to the king. It's kind of like having a watchdog system. I mean, they were making sure no one gets too comfortable misusing the power. But what made the whole empire run even smoother was something a bit more subtle, like it was about how they treated the people they ruled. So, moving on, unlike many empires, the Achaemenids did not try to erase the cultures of the places they conquered. They allowed people to keep their religion, language, and local laws, as long as they paid taxes and respected Persian authority. This approach earned trust and cooperation, and made rebellion way less likely. So instead of fighting constant resistance, they built loyalty, which made governing easier. And this smart approach became especially important as the empire kept expanding. Under Cyrus and the kings who came after him, the empire grew fast, taking over regions like Lydia, Babylon, Phoenicia, and Egypt. Each of these places had their own identity, but instead of forcing them to change, the Persians blended them into their existing system. So the empire became like a patchwork, with different customs and traditions. They were all connected under one rule. That's actually what happened in the Achaemenids, and that's what helped the Achaemenids to stay powerful for so long. So now let's take a closer look at one of these places, Babylon, to see exactly what this process looked like on the ground. Before Persia took over, Babylon was already a major center of power. It was rich, deeply religious, and led by priests and scholars connected to the temple of Marduk. It had its own strong bureaucracy and economy, and it functioned almost like a kingdom of its own. It wasn't just a city, it was a political and cultural powerhouse. But when Cyrus conquered it in 539 BCE, something interesting happened. Let's try to know about that. Cyrus entered Babylon peacefully and made a big statement with the Cyrus cylinder, promising religious freedom and restoring temples. That move itself helped him win support. But behind the scenes, big changes were happening. For example, Babylon became a Persian province or satrapy. A Persian governor now called the shots, and Babylonian elites started to lose influence, especially over things like taxes, foreign policy, etc. So even though life looked quite similar on the outside, the balance of power had clearly shifted. Babylon's temples were still there, its culture did not disappear, but the city was no longer making big decisions for itself. It was now part of much a larger system, connected by things like the royal road. It's a highway that linked cities across the empire. This also shows how Persian rule wasn't just about military conquest, but it was also about changing where decisions were made and who made them. So now let's jump to the other side, a non monarchy that took a completely different approach, which is the Roman Republic. So, to start with, Rome also started with kings, but around 509 BCE, that changed. The last king, Tarquinius Superbus, was seen as corrupt and abusive, and the people had enough of him. Uh, uh, for that reason, they overthrew him and said, never again. That moment gave birth to the Republic, a system designed to stop any one person from having too much power. This system is quite famous these days. So, if not a king, then what? Let's look at how the Romans redesigned their government. Instead of one ruler, they had two consuls elected each year, and they had to agree on decisions. They also had the Senate, which gave they also had the senates, which gave advice and helped shape laws, and citizen assemblies that voted on key matters. So power was shared and leadership rotated. No one person could take over. This was Rome's way of protecting freedom while still getting things done. But the most interesting part was what it meant to be a citizen in this system. So, in the Roman Republic, being a citizen meant being involved. You could vote, debate, even run for office, and people actually did that. Power wasn't just something like you were born into, right? It's more like it's something you earned through service, reputation, and contribution. So, this gave people a sense of ownership that they were part of the system and they were not just ruled by it. So, this was all about it. And now that we have explored both, let's try to compare the both systems. Let's try to compare it. I feel that the Achaemenid Empire shows how monarchy can work through strong leadership and respect for diversity. The Roman Republic, on the other hand, shows how a society can thrive um, on shared power and active participation. They took opposite approaches, but both made huge impacts on the outside world. And honestly, we still feel the effects today, right? For example, in how our government works, or how we think about leadership, and who gets to make decisions, etc. So I feel like studying this is not just about the past, it's something more than that. It's about understanding power in the present. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Ryan Islam. I am from section 19. Our midterm topic is bureaucracy beyond regimes, administrative and political power in monarchy and non-monarchy. Bureaucracy in ancient kingdoms and democracies. Monarchies and non-monarchies both relied on elaborated bureaucracies. Although ancient monarchies such as the Achaemenid Empire and non-monarchies such as ancient Athens shared a fundamental difference on their political ideologies, they both were supported by an elaborate system of bureaucracy in governing them, administering the rule of law, and maintaining their polities. The administrative system did not just form part of the logistical order but also part of the ideological order of every regime in a monarchy serving imperial consolidation. In a democratic system, participatory oversight. By critically reflecting on these two contrary examples, it has been revealed that bureaucracy plays a critical role in conversion of political power into functional rules regardless of regime type. What is bureaucracy? Bureaucracy is an administrative system aiming at enforcing legal and political order that is driven by the hierarchical authority, formal regularity, and is appointed meritocratically as defined by Max Weber. In a monarchy and a democracy, bureaucracy is the machine that will bring the law and policy into action. According to Fukuyama, a functioning bureaucracy will make state institutions operate impersonally and is in a predictable manner, thus guaranteeing its legitimacy and continuity. Why every regime needs it? Administrative hierarchy is the layering within authority within a governmental setup. It establishes roles, responsibilities, and line of authority. This structure helps centralization of power in monarchies and serves to protect fair administration in non-monarchies as it distributes power among several institutions. Bureaucracy in monarchical system. Achaemenid Empire building an imperial machine. One of the earliest and most successful bureaucracy was implemented in the Achaemenid Empire by such leaders as Cyrus the Great and Darius I, who designed one of the most efficient forms of bureaucracies in an imperial monarchy. The size of the empire, encompassing the Indus Valley and stretching to the Aegean Sea, required an administrative system that could exercise power remotely and at the same time have a central control. Darius I also initiated the system of satrapy, where the empire was divided into 20 to 30 provinces with a satrap in each province having an agenda of collecting taxes, maintaining law, and local government. In order to avert regional disobedience, the Achaemenid Empire had divided civil and military power by appointing independent commanders and loyal inspectors, the king eyes and ears to examine satraps and ensure obedience. An imperial legal system of locally elected judges reconciling the imperial verdicts with local practices promoted both the bureaucratic efficiency and cultural legitimacy. This two-pronged policy enabled the Achaemenid bureaucracy to maintain its rule and with strengthening of the imperial power. Bureaucracy in non-monarchical system. Athenian democracy still needed bureaucracy. Unlike centralized kingship of the Persian state, the direct democracy in ancient Athens was greatly appreciated by its population. Notwithstanding this democratic structure, there were bureaucratic activities which the state cannot operate without. The Athenian government based its control on a system of rotation in the administration whereby citizens were chosen either by lot or at an election in order to hold a government office, and it's led to a widespread input in governance with little and less chances of governmental aristocracies. Institutions and accountability in Athens. Ancient Athens, though embodying the outlook of democratic culture, continued a system of organized bureaucracy as held by several institutions, including the Council of 500 the archons, and other clerks and auditors. Much of them accountability was gathered through straightforward mechanisms such as dokimasia that made a de facto bureaucratic system possible, which was dependent on the clockwork of citizen rotation instead of the professional administration. Bureaucratic purpose and governance functions. Although they were both the same tool, but they have the different aims. Even though the political system of the Achaemenid Empire and the ancient Athens was incompatible, they both used bureaucracy in order to express and impose their fundamental ideological beliefs. The Persian system believed in centralized restrictions specific to the top to bottom structure to strengthen the authority of the empire and insisted on the horizontal structure of governments under which citizens had their democratic responsibility under Athens. In both instances, bureaucratic hierarchy was not an indicator of dictatorship and freedom per se, but an impartial system made of bureaucracy according to the political system and aims of the regime. To conclude, the analysis of ancient bureaucracy in Achaemenid monarchy and Athenian democracy highlights a rather basic historical lesson that bureaucratic systems do not belong to any particular form of government, but exist in the core of the ability of any state of government. Section of the poorest arbitrarily or refuting allegations of the rule of law, authorities across vast empires, or in small city-states, the administrative hierarchies mobilize in inform historical experiences of law and order and political power. Their early prototypes of bureaucracy show how bureaucracy as a critical part of the statecraft needs only an evolving form but not its primary purpose to ensure across time and regime. That is all from my side. Thank you very much.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Naim Islam. I am from section 19 and I am the fourth presenter of this presentation. Today, I will be presenting on the political and administrative hierarchies of two foundational ascent system, Achaemenid Persia and ancient Athens. These two civilizations developed very different models of governments. So, one a vast monarchy with imperial bureaucracy, that other a small city-state with a participatory democracy. I will also analyze which of this system was more politically efficient using both my perspective and our HUM101 class materials and scholarly sources. So, here we look that Asian government structure. Here is the thesis statement of our project. Moving into the next slide, importance of hierarchies. So here we need order and stability, law enforcement, and political decision making. So let's begin by understanding with hierarchical structure matter in governments as emphasized in our HUM101 class, especially during the lecture on imperial building and administration. Governments structure are not arbitrary, they are designed to maintain order, distribute power, and ensure the survival of the state across time and space. In both the empire and ancient Athens structure, hierarchies helped ensure law enforcement, political decision making, and resource management. However, they did do it very different ways, as we all see next. So here we see that Persia. 3 point is here. The emperor, as covered in our lecture on Persian imperial policies, operated through a monarchical bureaucratic hierarchy with the great king or Shehenshah at the top. His authority was believed to the divine a theme also tied to mythological justification of kingship, which we explore in session 3. Below him were the steps provided governance who merged taxation, law enforcement, and military recruitment in their religions, as we saw in the class reading on territorial management. Policies of three, these steps were powerful, but they were held accountable through a careful structure oversight system. So each steppery was divided into smaller districts led by sub-steps and local officials. Most importantly, the empire employed inspector general called the eyes and ears at the king, who by-stepped the local authorities also reported directly to the emperor. So, according to historian Perret, this administrative structure allowed the America to balance regional autonomy with imperial control, making it one of the most efficient governance system at the Asian world. So, in the next slide, we see that ancient Athens direct democracy and exclusion. Now let's turn to the ancient Athens, which we discussed in our class, that ancient democracy are Aristotle's policy cycles. Athens developed an non-monarchical direct democracy where free adults male could participate directly in governments. At the core was the epilepsa or people assembly, which debate and vote on laws and foreign policies. Supporting it was the Bolu, a council of 500 citizens chosen by lot, as explained in our class slides on, and structure of the Athenian assembly. This council act as an executive committee that organizing the agenda for the assembly. So Athens also had people's courts or dicastria with large citizens judicials, a judicial structure that helped check the power of Italicus. Additionally, according to Paul Cartledge, this system promoted public accountability, civic responsibility, and participation. However, as we noted in our class, this democracy excluded women, slaves, and metrics, which shows its limitation despite the ideology of equality. Here, purposes of these hierarchies, comparative analysis of our hierarchies, political efficiency, stability, and long-term sustainability. From our class discussion on governments across civilization, we understand that the structure was necessary to grow a massive multi-ethnic empire. But on the other hand, the Athenia system rooted its emperor or good order as promoted by Solon and designed for a small, relatively homogeneous cities. So, and the comparison of government systems is now to the key question: which system was more politically efficient, Athenia democracy or Achaemenid empire? So in Athenia, democracy was groundbreaking in its civic ideals, but as our HUM101 class lecture point out, it was also fragile. The system was prone to internal conflict, demography, and economic disparity. It depends heavily on tribute from its naval empire, making it unsustainable during crisis. It consists that Achaemenid empire development politic sustainability, it government desired theoretical for our over 2 centuries. So using a bureaucratic system that functioned beyond individual rules, as our Amda Pondes explains, Persian kings rules using soft power allow religious freedom and local customs which strengthen loyalty without brute forces. So at the end, we are in the end of our discussion. To conclude, this comparison reflects core themes of our classes: how governments, myth, ideology, and administration interact in shaping civilization. Athens probability, liberty, and struggled with exclusion and instability, and also In terms of political efficiency and administrative durability, the Ahmadiyya hierarchical system was more efficient than the Athens democratic one. Thank you for listening.
Hello, I'm Chaudhry Saima Roshan. I'm from section 19. Today I'll be talking about the significant role political ideologies play in shaping countries and empires, and how these ideologies affect everything from government structure to social norms and policies. So, what political ideology actually is? Political ideology is a collection of beliefs, values, and ideas on governance, power, rights, and economy. It actually tells us who should be in charge, what rights should people have, and how should the economy be managed. Some ideologies are liberal, and some are conservative, some are socialist, and even some are communist. These ideas often lead to big changes in the world and even the rise or fall of empires. For example, during the Cold War, the world was divided into two ideologies: capitalism, which was led by USA, and communism, which was led by Soviet Union. This was just not a political fight. It was also a battle of ideas that affected wars, alliances, and global decisions. So, what actually are the sources of political ideology? Political ideologies come from many sources like ethics, religion, social class, citizenship, or concept of polis. In ancient Greece, the people of Athens believed in justice and fairness. That's why they built a democratic system where citizens could vote and help making laws. In India, religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism influenced leaders like Emperor Ashoka, who promoted peace, nonviolence, and moral leadership. Religion also shaped politics in other places, like in ancient Egypt. Kings were also seen as gods, and in modern countries like Iran, the government is based on Islamic laws, where religion and politics are very closely connected. So now let's shift to the difference between monarchy and non-monarchy. Um, a monarchy is actually a system ruled by a king, whereas a non-monarchy is like democracy, ruled by the people. The Persian Empire was a monarchy. The king had all of the power and was seen as chosen by the gods. The empire was huge, and that's why the king use local governors to help rule the different areas. Religion and culture helped keep the people loyal to the king, whereas classical Athens was a democracy. Free male citizens could vote and help making decisions. They believed in freedom, justice, and participation. Great thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle helped shape these ideas. In conclusion, we can say that political ideologies are not just theories, they actually shape real lives. They decide how power is used and who gets what, and how people and government interacts. Whether it's a strong monarchy like Persian Empire or a direct democracy like Athens, the ideas behind these systems had huge effect on history and still they have. That's all from my side. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, I'm Sadia Habib Nisho from Group 16. Today, I will talk about part 3 of our presentation, focusing on political ideologies and laws and how they related to Aristotle's political cycle. Let's start with Aristotle's idea about governments. He said that governments can go through a cycle. They start strong, but over the time they change and sometimes become unfair. Aristotle describes there are three main types of government that works well. Monarchies, where one leader rules with care for the people. Secondly comes aristocracy, where a few qualified people share power responsibly. And lastly, polity, which is a balanced form of government involving many people. But over the time, they can change into others. Monarchy can turn into tyranny, where the leader rules mainly for themselves. Aristocracy can turn into oligarchy, where a small group uses power for their own benefits. And lastly, polity. It becomes something where rule by the mob when things get out of control. This cycles repeats because power can easily become forced on the wrong interest. So now the question comes, why does these cycles happen again and again? Aristotle believed that it happens when ruler focuses on their own interest instead of the public's need. When leaders become selfish, problems start. Another reason is inequality. When wealth and power belong to only a few people, many others feel left out, and it becomes a conflict. Also, weak laws and the absence of a strong middle class make it hard for the government to stay steady. So, when trust breaks down, fairness is missing, governments tend to change, continuing the cycle. We can see Aristotle's cycle in today's world as well. For example, in Bangladesh, the government has changed between democracy and military rule several times, showing political instability. In United States, there were a strong democracy, but political disagreements and division shows signs of stress in the system. Here come some more other examples. Like in Russia, after the communism ends, there was some democracy, but now the system is more centralized and controlled. In China, the government has strong control over the country, limiting political freedom, which could cause changes later. All these examples shows government continue to go through changes, as Aristotle described. Now, let's compare two common government type, democracy and dictatorship. Democracy allows people to participate in government and express their opinions, but it can also face problems like division between groups or leaders making empty promises to get votes. Dictatorships can make decisions quickly and keep order, but it often limits people's freedom, and many use power unfairly. Aristotle suggested a mixed system that balances power between different groups to avoid this extreme. He also said strong laws, education, a healthy middle class, and an active citizen are important to keep governments stable. To conclude that Aristotle's political cycles helps us understand why governments change over time. Changes happen when leaders stop focusing on common interest and when inequality grows. Although no system is perfect, we, we can show down these changes by focusing on unfairness, balance, and making sure leaders serve the people. So that's all about for the time being. Thank you so much everyone for listening to me.
Assalamualaikum and good afternoon. I am Ridwanul Basit and I am from section 20. My group number is 16 and me and my others two members we have chosen to talk on fourth part and I am the first speaker of fourth part. Now I am going to talk about gender politics in ancient history, especially how gender roles were constructed, enforced, and perform in those times. I'll also be using a theoretical framework to explain this in more depth. Now, I'd like to share my second slide. In my second slide, I would like to talk about understanding gender as a social construct. Here I have break down some bullet points. Now, now I will briefly talk in those points. First, let's understand what we mean by gender. Gender is not the same as biological sex. It is a social identity shaped by culture, religion, power, and history. What it means to be a man or woman has changed across time and place. Gender is not fixed, it is fluid and performative. People act out gender roles in ways that are expected by their society. In different historical periods, gender roles were assigned and reinforced through norms, expectation, and institution. Now I am going to move to my third slide. In this slide, I like to talk gender in ancient societies. Gender shaped laws, customs, and ritual. What does it mean? In ancient societies, gender roles were built into laws, customs, and daily life. Men were typically in charge of political and military roles. Women stayed at home, raised children, and were expected to protect the family's honor. These roles were not optional, they were enforced through rituals, traditions, and social norms. Gender were used to organize inheritance, citizenship, labor, and power. Basically, in that time, women worked in home and men, men were working outside home. Now, now I am going to talk on role of religion, ritual, and law. Religion reinforces gender roles. What does it mean? Religion played a huge role in reinforcing gender norms. In the academic empire, the religion taught that gender duties helped maintain cosmic balance. Women were seen as keepers of ritual purity. Legal systems legal systems also reinforce partially women could not own property or participate in political and many places. In that politics and places were run by men. Together, religion and law made gender inequality feel natural or even scared. Now, I will talk on the gender representations framework. Now let's look at the gender representation framework by Ingram, which was published on 2024. The theory sees gender not just as something people are, but as something they do. It says that gender is performed and shaped by systems of power. The frameworks at three levels: macro, meso, and micro, and helps us understand how gender was part of public life, not just private identity. Now let's talk on macro, meso, and micro performance. Macro. At the macro level, societies created big ideals. Kings were brave, women were fertile and pure. At the meso level, individuals were expected to follow those ideals. For example, women had to manage households and remain loyal. At the micro level, people perform gender in everyday life. through behavior, dress, and language. Failing to act in gender appropriate ways often means punishment or exclusion. Now, here was all about my presentation. Now let's talk on some conclusion. To conclude, gender was a major part of how ancient societies worked. It was not just about personal identity. It was a tool used to maintain order and power. Religion and law helped make gender roles seem natural. The performative framework shows us that gender was actively enforced at all levels of society. This helps us read history more critically and understand how deeply gender and power were connected in ancient world. Thank you. That's all from me. Now my second speaker will talk their part.
Hello everyone, this is Sadia Islam. My section number is 19. Today, I will be talking about the position of women in selected monarchies, focusing on Achaemenid, Persia, and ancient China. What's really fascinating is how different these two systems were in the way they shaped women's roles, society, politically, and legally. We'll see that monarchy as a system didn't guarantee power to women. Their ability to act or influence was deeply tied to institutional frameworks like class, royal status, and ideology. In both cases, women could be powerful, but that power came with very specific conditions. Let's start with Achaemenid Persia. This empire, which lasted from around 550 to 330 BC, is one of the best examples where elite women could wield real influence, especially inside the royal court. For example, royal women owned land, managed large estates, and even had servants and laborers under their control. They appear frequently in administrative records like the Persepolis fortification tablets, which show they could issue orders, distribute rations, and receive wages. One of the most powerful figures was Queen Athosa, the daughter of Cyrus the Great, wife and wife of Darius I. She had both dynastic power and political influence. So, even though didn't rule officially, women in Achaemenid Persia had legal and economic autonomy as long as they were part of the royal elite. Now, moving to ancient China. Here, the story is quite different. Women were heavily shaped by Confucian ideology, which emphasized order, hierarchy, and male dominance. Most women were expected to follow the three obediences: obedience to father before marriage, husband after marriage, and soon in widowhood. Their primary role was in the domestic sphere, raising children, managing the household, and maintenance harmony. However, there were exceptions. Women like Empress Lucy and Empress Ozetian actually seized real political power. Ozetian even became the only female emperor in Chinese history. But these were rare cases. For most women, even in elite families, power came through marriage alliances or as regards for young sons. They had limited legal rights, such as holding down dowries or small pieces of properties. But these rights were often symbolic rather than practical. So, how do these two monarchies compare? In Persia, royal women had recognized economic and legal roles. Their power was embedded in the empire's administration, even if indirectly. In contrast, Chinese elite women were ideological control. Their influence came more from court manipulation or family strategy than from legal rights. One key similarity is that power was concentrated among elite women. Common women in both societies had little to no political agency. In conclusion, while both monarchies had space for powerful women, that power was conditional, exceptional, and often dependent on their relationship to men. So, monarchy didn't erase gender roles, it just bent the rules for a very select few. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Khanokar Ziaur Rahman and I'm from section 19. So today I'll be discussing the position of women in two non-monarchical systems, Athens and Sparta, and how the two city states, although both patriarchal, treated women in strikingly very different ways. Athens, the so-called mother of democracy, systematically excluded women from political, legal, and even public life. Scholars say it is a form of structural phallocracy, where male dominance was deeply institutionalized. In contrast, Sparta gave women roles in education, finance, and public religious life, as discussed by Pommery and Catledge. While they weren't equal to men, Spartan women were given tools to participate, though still within gender roles defined by the state. So let's begin with the Athens. Despite being the birthplace of democratic ideals, Athenian women were politically invisible. They had no voting rights, no access to public education, and were barred from participating in political or legal decisions. Every woman was under the control of the Kyrios, a male guardian, who managed her property, marriage, and even day-to-day legal matters. As Osborne points out, Athenian law kept women within the household and away from public life. Even philosophers supported this system. Aristotle argued that women lacked the rational qualities necessary for governance, further reinforcing their exclusion. This wasn't a failure of democracy, it was the part of its own design. Women were ideologically formed as inferior, the democracy were used as a legal weapon to justify their oppression. Sparta, on the other hand, offers a very different model. Although still patriarchal, Sparta gave women a structured role in society. As few philosophers notes, there were even magistrates known as gyneconomy who monitored women's behavior, which shows that women had enough public visibility to need regulations. Spartan girls received physical education alongside boys. They trained in gymnastics, they learned literacy, and they were prepared for the motherhood with a focus on producing a very strong children on the state. Unlike the Athens, Spartan women could own and inherit land, making them powerful economic figures. Few philosophers also points out that women played visible roles in religious festival rituals, allowing them cultural influence that Athenian women never ever had. So now let's compare them. Both Athens and Sparta were patriarchal, but the ways that they expressed that patriarchy were radically very different. Athens practiced a phallocracy, made male ruled backed by law and ideology. Women were kept on the civic identity altogether. Sparta, in contrast, treated women as functional member of the militarized survival focused state. Their inclusion wasn't based on equality, it was based on pragmatism. The state needs strong mothers, property managers, and religious figures. So, while neither society offered true gender equality, Sparta at least recognized women as contributors to the state when Athens denied them even the status of citizens. In the end, the contrast reveals that the institutional structure of a society matters more than just its political label. Democracy in Athens meant exclusion for women, while militarism in Sparta created space, however limited, for female agency. That's why compared these two helps us understand how culture and law together shape the lives of a woman, even in system not ruled by the kings. Thank you so much everyone.